Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Bobby Sylvester with Mike Tagliere. As always, you can find us on Twitter at BobbyFantasyPro and at Mike Tagliere NFL. Tags, how's it going, man?
You know what's funny, Bobby, is that as soon as I heard you start talking, you are just like me right now. So we're recording this podcast at night, and Bobby and I are usually like, I got coffee in me. I'm jacked up. Bobby's usually jacked up to begin with, but Bobby's exhausted right now from taking care of the kids all day. I'm winding down for the day. So if we sound a little bit less jumpy, I guess you could say, it's because we're recording this podcast at night.
I will be every bit as jumpy. You can bet on that. So today we're going to be talking about our biggest takeaways from Minicamp, then jumping into the listener mailbag to answer some great questions from our listeners, including some about 2 quarterback leagues. And joining Tags and I discuss all this is the perfect guest for that, Greg Smith of 2QBs.com. You can follow Greg on Twitter at GregSauce. Greg, thanks for coming to the show. How's your spring been?
Oh, it's been busy. It's been great. But yeah, man, call in the West Coast reinforcements. It's still sunny out over here on this side of the country. So I'll bring that daily vibe, I guess, to the show today, and can't wait to dive into some of these questions, man. I'm ready to chop it up. Let's do it.
Yeah, we've got thunderstorms going on right here as I speak, and that's why my kid keeps getting out of bed. So sorry to our producer who's going to have to deal with that if he gets out. You know, when I was writing this, how I wanted to introduce Greg and everything I wrote, how's your summer been? Don't most people feel like it's been summer? We're still in spring. How weird is that? It is technically still spring. That seems wrong. It's like 1,000 degrees here. Summer begins in 2 days, man.
That's exactly, you know what's funny, Greg? That's exactly what I tie it to. It's like when my kid got out of school, it's like, okay, now it's summer break. And it's been really hot here too, Bobby. Like we've had, over the weekend, I kid you not, like where it says the feels like temperature, it said it was like 104 degrees on Sunday. It was ridiculous. Like I didn't want to go outside at all.
Yeah, well, just like everything else, St. Louis is just a little bit better than Chicago. So it was 105 here. And you're big wuss for thinking 104 is super hot. All right, guys, one of the sponsors of today's show is pristineauction.com, and they've got hundreds of lots that end every single night. Just listen to some of these deals I found just yesterday, okay? William the Fridge Perry, signed jersey, $43. Signed Le'Veon Bell Spartans jersey, $65. Signed Juju Smith-Schuster NFL football, just $61. Every day I just shake my head at some of the deals people are able to get. And I'm telling you, there is something for every sports fan there, something for your cave. Pristine Auction guarantees authenticity, and all items come with authentication from only the most trusted sources. It's quick, easy, and free, unless you win an item, obviously, then you have to pay for it. When you sign up, please be sure to let them know Fantasy Pros sent you. That way we can keep doing these giveaways from Pristine Auction. Speaking of which, we're giving away a signed DeAndre Hopkins jersey. If you want to go take a look at it, go to fantasypros.com/contest. The details are there for a quick entry into the contest. Again, that's pristineauction.com. Thank you for sponsoring today's show. That's Pristine. Okay, guys, let's talk minicamps. And Greg, why don't you go first? What's one big takeaway from minicamps?
Well, over at 2QBs, we're all about 2 quarterback formats, super flex, 2QB league. So you can imagine I'm going to lean towards that position here. And the first thing I want to talk about are these reports of Baker Mayfield, falling behind Tyrod Taylor in Cleveland's quarterback battle. I just don't buy it, man. Like, since 2008, quarterbacks drafted first overall have started an average of 13 and a half games in year one. Sam Bradford started 16. Jameis Winston started 16. Newton, same thing. Luck, same thing. Matt Stafford started 10. Jared Goff started 7. And if we expand that to the top 10, quarterbacks drafted in that range over the same span have started an average of 12.4 games in year one. And that's 17 players total. 15 started 7 or more games, 88% of players in that cohort. So, like, you can tell me all you want, Hugh Jackson, that Tyrod Taylor's the starter. I don't believe it. I think that he's probably just going to get Mayfielded, just like Mike Glennon got Trubisky last season. It's only a matter of time. So this is one of those things where when it comes to the preseason or leading up to the preseason, you have to be really careful about how much you read into these reports. Do you guys agree or disagree? What do you think is going to happen with those 2 quarterbacks in Cleveland?
Well, adding on to that, I think that Baker Mayfield is one of the most polished quarterbacks to go number 1 overall, too. Like Jared Goff, Mitch Trubisky, yeah, they've got plenty of talent. I don't think they were especially polished coming out, not quite like Baker Mayfield. So, if those guys are getting 10, 13 starts, it seems like Mayfield would, but The problem is most teams don't draft a 1-1 quarterback if they've got someone like Tyrod Taylor, who's one of the most efficient passers in NFL history, at least in terms of the turnover game. He wins a lot of games. He can run. I think he's ready to roll. So I'm not really sure what to think. I'm just going to go with what the depth chart ends up saying.
Yeah, so I'm kind of in between you guys in this one. I actually lean towards the side that I think Tyrod's going to start more than people think, because a lot of people have come on the show, including I think Jeff Ratcliffe not long ago. We talked with him, and he was saying that he expects Mayfield to start at least 10 games. I'm on the flip side of that, where, the Browns, they were on Baker Mayfield for a long time. They knew they were taking a quarterback at number 1 overall. There was never a question about that, regardless of all the reports that people wanted to make. But when you trade the first pick in the 3rd round for Tyrod Taylor on a 1-year deal, it kind of tells me all that I need to know.
Well, hold on just a second. They just tried to trade a 2nd and 3rd round pick for A.J. McCarron, who might be the 3rd string quarterback for the Bills right now.
Well, correct. And that's the thing is, so if they got A.J. McCarron, Baker Mayfield may have never gone number 1. They may have gone in a different direction. So that's what I'm saying. When they knew when they actually traded for Tyrod Taylor, they knew they were getting Baker Mayfield at number 1. So my issue here is that Tyrod Taylor is a good quarterback. I don't think that he's like one that you build your franchise around, but I think he's a very, very competent NFL quarterback. And I think it's really going to come down to if this team starts, 4-4, if they go 3-5, we'll say, and looking at their schedule, I don't think it's that difficult for them to do that. They got games against the Jets and the Raiders in the first 4 weeks. Then they have the Ravens, who are expected to take a step back. The Bucks are in there. There's some teams in there that they can beat. I think it all comes down to Hugh Jackson when he is fired. And that's the thing. They don't have their bye week until week 11. So for me, I view it differently than Glennon and Trubisky, because Mike Glennon was not a good quarterback at all. And I said that when the Bears signed him. Tyrod Taylor, I actually think, is a good quarterback. I think they want to run the ball. I think they have the team in place to run the ball, throw if they need to. I think they're going to take it easy with Baker Mayfield. I don't think they're going to rush him in. So I have Tyrod Taylor projected for 10 games, and I think they go to Mayfield after the bye week if they're out of it. And if they're still playing, obviously 500 ball, I don't think that they're going to make any sort of switch, because it's obviously leaps and bounds in front of where they were last year. So I'm actually on the flip side of Greg on this one. Is actually that report is like a negative about Mayfield. And those are the news reports I tend to listen to in the off season. I want to hear the negative ones, because those are the ones that usually carry the most weight.
But if you look at what these guys are saying in those reports, it's like Tyrod Taylor is the leader of this team. They don't say Tyrod Taylor is the quarterback of this team. They say that Baker Mayfield isn't ready to compete with Tyrod Taylor. He's a rookie. It's, the first couple weeks of training camp here. Like, how's he supposed to be ready? He shouldn't be ready. Like, they're just kind of spewing platitudes at this point to where, like, I don't know. I don't buy it at all. Like, I think if anything, the fact that they have that week 11 bye, the fact that Hugh Jackson doesn't necessarily have an easy window to be fired within early in the season, like, that makes me think he'd be better off going with the rookie and seeing, at least like playing towards the fans' expectations, playing towards, the hype surrounding having the number 1 overall pick. I mean, does that make sense to you? I feel like we have some like small fantasy related bias when it comes to Tyrod Taylor. Like, I agree, he is much better than Mike Glennon, but the fact of the matter is that he's good for fantasy. He's not necessarily good for an NFL franchise, full stop. Like, I don't necessarily see him as a guy that they want to have in their long term. If they did, they wouldn't have drafted Baker Mayfield. And so I know I'd much rather err on the side of Jeff Ratcliffe and say, 10 or more games for Mayfield. And again, like, the statistics around like general QB draft picks in that high end range of the draft, like, it makes sense. Like, these guys have pressure behind, like, the franchises have pressure put on them to get these guys into games. And I think we're going to see that sooner than later.
Yeah, and I actually agree with you. And the funny thing is Greg, I'm not sure if you know, I'm a huge Baker Mayfield fan. I think that he's going to make an impact in this league. I have him as my number 13 dynasty quarterback right now. So I'm a huge fan of Baker.
Wow.
I do believe he's going to take over this job, and I think he's going to succeed in the NFL. I just don't think it's as fast as we'd want it to go. And that's the thing. Tyrod, the whole thing about Tyrod, I know he's a better fantasy quarterback than he is a real life quarterback, but at the same time, there weren't many quarterbacks who could have carried the Bills to the playoffs last year. Like, the Bills were not a very good team, and Tyrod, I would say, was a bigger contributor than most people want to say that he was. So that's what I'm saying. The first pick in the 3rd round, that's what sells me on it. It was a 1-year deal. Why sign him when there was a lot of other free agent quarterbacks out there that got on a 1-year deal to make a couple starts? But Tyrod, that was expensive. That's very expensive in today's NFL.
I mean, if they're trying to trade a 2nd and 3rd round pick, more for A.J. McCarron than Jimmy Garoppolo, then obviously what they're willing to do doesn't mean anything because they're just stupid.
Well, to be fair, though, John Dorsey, that's before John Dorsey kind of took over the organization. John Dorsey is now the GM. That was Hugh Jackson, who is vying for A.J. McCarron. Obviously, Hugh Jackson coming from the Cincinnati organization before going to Cleveland. So there were some ties there. I don't think John Dorsey has those same connections to A.J. McCarron and would give up a second and third for him. Regardless, the first pick in the third round is still a lot of equity for a one-year deal.
My first takeaway here, guys, was actually the opposite. I think that what Greg is saying makes sense. So I'm still going to share this because if this does happen, I think that it changes things big time. I said, I think Tyrod's going to be the starter. At least that's what it seems. Maybe even for the entire season based on the reports that are coming out. And I think this kills, if it happens, absolutely kills Josh Gordon and especially Jarvis Landry's value. Where would you guys rank him if Tyrod, it looks like, is going to be the starter?
I don't know. I'm kind of staying away from that receiver core for that reason in the first place. Like even with Mayfield under center, I don't necessarily know if those are guys who you want to be targeting in your drafts at their prices. I think they're both a little inflated. There's not a really great track record for wide receivers changing teams. So Landry already is someone who I'm wary of. Gordon, I think, is definitely the higher upside play and a guy I'm more willing to draft than Landry. But there are plenty of other receivers available in that range that I'd like a little bit more. You know, your Allen Robinsons, your Alshon Jeffries, players like that. So I'm kind of staying away from those guys in the first place, almost regardless of the quarterback situation. What about you, Tags?
I'm actually right there with you. I as I mentioned, I anticipate Tyrod Taylor starting 10 games, and my projections, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to find 110 targets for both Josh Gordon and Jarvis Landry. They just signed Duke Johnson to a long extension, which is kind of crazy because they still have David Njoku. They drafted Antonio Callaway, Corey Coleman's still there. There's just so many names here, and the Browns organization, once Baker takes over, like this team is going to be the offense is going to be really good. They have a solid offensive line in place. The left tackle position without Joe Thomas is a little interesting, but this is going to be a really good team. But at the same time, it's like, when you start looking at all these things, it's like, who's going to get this? Who's going to get this? You usually want to gravitate towards the quarterback in those situations. So unfortunately, it's not a crystal clear situation, but down the road, it's going to be Baker, and we know that.
Yeah. All right, Tags, what's your first takeaway, man?
I actually had that one down as well in my takeaways, but one that I wanted to discuss, I mentioned one of the things that happens during the off season is you're going to hear a lot of fluff, and like literally you could type in anybody's name and you could find something good written about nearly everyone. But there's a negative thing when it comes to the Green Bay backfield. Everybody wants to tell you that you should draft Jamal Williams. Everybody wants to tell you that you should draft Aaron Jones. Then people are telling you Ty Montgomery's not going anywhere. The sad reality of it is that Mike McCarthy came out and said, this is a three-headed monster, guys. Like we're running back by timeshare. And it's kind of been this way. When we had Eddie Lacy for those couple years, that was kind of an outlier in what's happened in this backfield. Then it became Eddie Lacy and James Starks. And then you started seeing more and more players start to be mixed in. The only reason that Jamal Williams was getting the carries he was last year, the only reason that Aaron Jones was getting the carries he was last year was because there were injuries all over the team, guys. And they didn't trust, obviously, they didn't trust the quarterback situation. They didn't want to throw the ball a whole lot. So saying it's a three-headed monster, it's a backfield that before I was saying, if you want to draft Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones, I'm fine with that because you'll probably end up with, a top 15 running back. But it's starting to look uglier and uglier, and I've actually dropped both of them down my draft boards.
I was drafting all three of them. I was recommending it on the show too, and I'm sorry about that if you already had some drafts because I don't think that's going to play out so well. With that being said, I dropped them all down substantially. I'm not taking any of them in the top 36 running backs at this point. I had Aaron Jones all the way up at 28 before then. But let me ask you this question, Greg. Like, if there are injuries again, obviously Aaron Jones, if he's not the one injured, could be a top 12 running back. Or let's just say he goes in there and just absolutely dominates. Are you saying that they wouldn't just flat out give this job to Aaron Jones?
Well, they could, and they did that for a time last year. Mike's right. The Eddie Lacy situation was an outlier for the Packers, but it was also an outlier kind of across the entire NFL. Like more and more teams are gravitating away from that workhorse running back role and employing more of a committee. And that allows them to be more specialized in their packages, putting in, the Tariq Cohens or the Chris Thompsons in passing down situations. And the nice thing about this Green Bay backfield to me is that these guys are generally pretty well rounded. I mean, Montgomery is a little bit more of a pass catcher because he used to be a wide receiver, but Jones is a good rusher and receiver. Williams, showed flashes of being able to do both things as well, to the point where I think there is value in these guys still. And you don't have to pay a super high price to get any of them because the situation is so nebulous. You're going to want to invest at least in one of them at some point in your fantasy drafts. Like, you're not going to want to take the same one in every draft. But I mean, you guys are like me. You play in a ton of leagues. Like, there are going to be some leagues where I go after Jones, some where I go after Williams, some where I go after Ty Montgomery. And they're all going in those like mid to late rounds often enough to where you can feel okay about that because of that injury related upside you were talking about. Like, if one of these guys gets hurt or if one of them gets the quote unquote hot hand, you can ride that. You can really take that to like drive your team to success. I still like these guys in a vacuum. I just don't want to have to pay a high price to get them. And luckily you don't have to.
All right, Greg, let's move on to your number 2 takeaway. What do you have here for us?
So let's get back to QBs, and Andrew Luck can actually throw footballs.
Yeah.
Yes. And he feels no pain, he said.
Yeah. I mean, and this is important because Luck is one of the few passers available outside of the top 5 at the position with really easy to forecast top 5 value based on his track record. Because we're seeing guys go in the top 5 now, like Deshaun Watson and Carson Wentz, who have only really done it for 1 year. Luck is a guy who...
Or 5 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Year after year was a top-end quarterback producer, and he's going to start to skyrocket up draft boards. I mean, we really kind of have to assume he's going to be back to full health to start the season. We probably should have been assuming that the whole time. I think the bigger question for me with Luck is the group of weapons around him. And I'm kind of okay with optimism about those players. Like, T.Y. Hilton is still there to stretch defenses. Jack Doyle was a favorite tight end sleeper of pretty much everybody last season. They also brought in Eric Ebron, who, is an up and down player, but should help. Marlon Mack and Naheem Hines are versatile out of the backfield. And you can joke about Ryan Grant all you want, but he's a fine tertiary piece, kind of like maybe Albert Wilson was for the Chiefs last year. We're even seeing some of these late round rookie receivers they brought in getting some praise in minicamp. Deion Kane kind of showed some flashes of potential in college at Clemson. So I think there's something to be excited about when it comes to this Colts offense. And ultimately, if we're talking about the risk associated with Luck, how is that any different than the risk associated with Carson Wentz coming back from injury? Like, I think it's pretty easy to say that last season, 2017, was not only just a full year of recovery for Luck, like one where he just wanted to make sure that he would be able to get back to playing football full time, but it was also kind of an NBA style tanking season for the Colts. Like,
yeah,
there's a lot of reasons that you can point to from last season and say, okay, this is why they didn't rush Luck back. It makes sense. And that's why I think we can actually be optimistic about him and project him as a top 5 or top 6 fantasy quarterback from here on out.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And, I'm looking at his stats from the past 3 years he was healthy. And if you combine those 3 seasons, he averages 20.5 fantasy points per game. Guys, that's a full 2 points per game higher than Tom Brady last year, Aaron Rodgers last year, Cam Newton last year. Those are 3 of the top 5 fantasy quarterbacks. And Andrew Luck did it for 3 straight seasons.
And he did it under Chuck Pagano.
And one thing to keep in mind with that, though, is that it was generally based on volume. He's a guy who was a compiler because their defense was pretty much always bad. And will their defense improve? I don't think it'll improve that much. So I think we can still count on that sort of volume for Luck. It'll be interesting to see if they maybe shift their play calling split a little bit to run the ball a little bit more in the hopes of, keeping Luck healthier longer. Like, he took a lot of hits in those 3 years as well. So something to keep in mind, some caveats, some words of caution, but that is something to be wary of is that he was often putting up those big numbers based upon just pure volume more than anything else.
Well, I mean, the efficiency of the offense wasn't there. I think like Luck as a quarterback, I think people expected even more than he was doing. And some people have actually called him a bust. And I wouldn't call him a bust. I think he looked fine when he was out there. I think that Chuck Pagano limited the potential of that offense. I also think that the Colts didn't really do him any favors with the passing core. They went out and signed, they got Eric Ebron. I mean, they drafted wide receivers on day 3 of the draft. I mean, what are you doing? I felt like with 3 second-round picks in that trade that they did with the Jets, that they would have at least taken one receiver there to get him some help. And there were some good wide receivers on the board. Michael Gallup fell into the 3rd round. There's no excuse for what the Colts did in the draft. I am still miffed by that. I think Andrew Luck should be upset about that because T.Y. Hilton, he's nearing the end of his time with the Colts. He's a boomer bust receiver. He's a field stretcher. They should have got him a possession receiver. Now, can Ryan Grant be that guy? I don't know. I think Ryan Grant's better than some people think he is, but I also don't think that he's going to be a Brandon Marshall type player where it's like he's a guy that you could throw to and you're in trouble. So I think they screwed up with Luck there. His receivers, I don't know if they're going to allow him to get to that top 3 level that some wanted to believe, but I do think that Andrew Luck's going to come back. I think he's going to play well, and I think the Colts are going to realize after this year that he's going to need some more help. But Frank Reich coming there from the Doug Peterson offense, I do think that helps. I think it's going to be a much more efficient offense, so I don't think he'll necessarily require the volume that he needed in the past.
Yeah, don't forget he runs the ball too. I mean, last full season that he played, 341 yards. He's got 14 rushing touchdowns over his career in 70 games. He's going to put up some numbers that way as well. Like, I'm looking at his ADP now, and obviously it's going to rise, but how far do you think it's going to rise, Greg? I'm pretty sure I'm still going to be able to take Andrew Luck ahead of his ADP and like what I'm getting.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what I like about him is that he's still probably not going to leapfrog Watson. He's not going to leapfrog Wentz just because those guys are the shiny new objects that everyone's kind of gravitating towards. But I would estimate that he'll probably end up somewhere in that QB7 to QB10 range in ADP. And I think that that's a very fair price to pay for a guy who could be elite.
Where do you have him right now, Tags?
Right now, I'm leaving him at number 8. That's where I have him. I would love to see him play in the preseason a little bit. I don't know how much we're going to see of him. You know, I've told you on the show before, Bobby, that's my worst nightmare is that we're going to see Luck for a series during the preseason, and we're not going to know what to think. And the last thing I want to do is give someone bad advice. But knowing that Luck's out there practicing, knowing that he's throwing a football again is obviously a good sign. But the shoulder, man, that's an injury we don't see very often to a quarterback. You know, seeing them miss an entire season, coming back, you know, it took him over a year to throw a football. So there's some legitimate questions there. I just hope that they play him in the preseason for more than, you know, a series or a quarter. I want to see him for a legit full half of football before I trust anything and see him chuck the ball down the field a little bit.
You know, that's a good scenario for me, actually. If Andrew Luck only plays one preseason game, because then his ADP is going to drop to 10, 11, 12, and I can get Andrew Luck and Matt Ryan and feel really good about myself. If Andrew Luck's healthy, yeah, I've got a top 5 quarterback. If he's not healthy, so what? I've got Matt Ryan. I hardly spent anything on Andrew Luck. You know, my second takeaway builds off of that. It's based on Andrew Luck's health, and it's Eric Ebron. Like every single day when I read the news, you know whose name was in there? Eric Ebron, right? We didn't hear anything about Jack Doyle. It's how impressive Eric Ebron looks, and you know, no surprise. I mean, he was a former top 10 pick. This guy's put up some very good stats in his first 4 years in the league. I know he's been a disappointment to Lions fans, and the Lions cut him for whatever reason, but this is a guy with some talent. You put him on there. You talked about their depth chart. They have nobody. You put him on there, and if he can beat out Doyle for the job, he's got top 5 tight end upside, guys.
Yeah, I don't even think he necessarily needs to beat out Doyle. I think they can be complementary to one another because their receivers are so limited. I think that in general, that Colts offense is going to be a little bit more unconventional than a lot of the teams that are moving towards, 3 receiver sets as the base offense. We're going to see more 2 tight end stuff. We're going to see a lot more plays to the running backs out of the backfield on passing downs. This is something where you're going to get value at those non-wide receiver positions in the passing game, I think. And Ebron, could be a part of that. He should be a part of that. I mean, they signed him to do that, but I don't think we should be overlooking Doyle necessarily either.
I've actually been thinking about this one a lot because I was one saying that Doyle's got the chemistry with Andrew Luck. He's played with him. He overcame being behind Dwayne Allen on the depth chart, a couple of years ago when everybody thought it was the Dwayne Allen breakout party. So I have faith in Jack Doyle, but someone brought up something. I can't remember who it was I was talking to, but they brought up something very interesting and saying that Frank Reich taking over this offense is going to change things a little bit because Doyle's the better pass blocker. Eric Ebron is not necessarily known to be a good pass blocker. So are they going to keep Jack Doyle into block, and are they going to use Eric Ebron as kind of that move tight end? The one that they use as Zach Ertz as, the one that they use Travis Kelce as, the one that the Bears are going to use Trey Burton as. Is that the role that Ebron is going to play, or are they going to have Doyle moving around the formation? It's really tough to tell. So I'm hoping, again, there's a lot of things that the Colts that I'm hoping to see in the preseason. Whenever there's a coaching change, it'll shift things around quite a bit. So I'm trying to remain open about this. I have Doyle. I have him, I think, at 11 right now in my tight end rankings, and I have Ebron down at 18. So I'm not necessarily there on Ebron right now, but I'm willing to change.
I've got Ebron at 13 now. I just moved him way up.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't blame anybody for doing that because Ebron's a better receiver than he is a blocker. And if they signed him, they obviously had a role for him picked out.
All right, Tags, we'll get to your number 2 here in just a second. But first, we got a new sponsor, and I loved these guys. Colonel Encore Popcorn. They sent their premium popcorn with awesome flavors for Tags and I to try. When I was opening the box, the smell was just incredible. Like, I smelled it right away. And their salted caramel was absolutely delicious. A lot of times, when you eat caramel corn, the caramel's all lumpy and sticky on your teeth. Not this one. Every corner of the popcorn was covered just right. Wasn't heavy in your mouth. It wasn't too sweet. It was just right. I'm definitely going to get it again on my own dime. I'll bet you guys will love it just as much as I do. Tags, what was your favorite flavor, man?
Well, I love the 2 cheese one, and it's funny because ever since I started dieting, that's like my guilty pleasure, right? I diet all day, we have a healthy dinner, and then it gets to 7:00 at night, 8:00 at night. Actually, right now as we're recording this, my wife started making popcorn, and it was like our thing that it was like, this is like a little guilty pleasure, but to keep us sane. So when I heard about this sponsor, I was like, yes, popcorn, The 2 cheese one came, and that was like legit for me. My daughter loved the cookies and cream one, which was really interesting. So it's got something for everyone there. But the 2 cheese one was legit. I can't say enough good things about the 2 cheese one. That's the one I would suggest you guys try.
Okay, so we've got a promo code for you, www.coloneloncorepopcorn.com/fantasypros. Again, that's coloneloncorepopcorn.com/fantasypros. You'll save 10%, plus you'll get an entry for a chance to win a $100 certificate. Enter by June 30th because the drawing's on July 1st. Again, coloneloncorepopcorn.com/fantasypros. All right, Tags, what's your second takeaway, man?
All right. So the other one I wanted to really bring up was that Allen Hurns. So there's beat writer reporters saying that Allen Hurns is clearly the number one for the Cowboys. Like I said, I try not to listen to the fluff pieces because it's just everybody's being fluffed up. But when they say he's the clear number one, I think we all assume that. But it was more like, okay, let's just wait on the confirmation that he's out there in all 2 wide receiver sets, yada yada. That he's not playing the slot a lot like he was with the Jags. He's playing in 2 wide receiver sets. He's going to play on the perimeter a lot more. This is huge. And I say that because looking at Dez Bryant and Terrence Williams from like 2013 to 2015, people forget that Terrence Williams, despite how much we make fun of him all the time, he finishes a top 43 receiver in 3 consecutive seasons. And keep that in mind. That was while Dez Bryant, 2 of those seasons, Dez Bryant had 160 targets, 136 targets. He had over 1,200 yards, over 13 touchdowns in 2 of those seasons. So there was room for 2 receivers to produce in this offense. And that's what Dez Bryant kind of going off. So even if Michael Gallup somehow overcomes all the Cowboys, deficiencies and their inability to identify talent, if he makes a starting lineup, Allen Hurns is still going to be a better fantasy receiver than most people think because his ADP last time I checked was in the 50s. So he's kind of a steal. I'm not in love with Allen Hurns, but I think Dak Prescott is more than capable. A lot of teams are going to focus on stopping Ezekiel Elliott because, I mean, if you're an NFL head coach, why the heck would you not? So Allen Hurns, as much as I'm not like necessarily one who like loves Allen Hurns as a player, but he's going to get the volume and he's going to produce as a top 50 wide receiver. So hearing is that he's a clear-cut number one and that he's got a head up on Michael Gallup, that's kind of big.
All right, over to the listener mailbag for the rest of the show, and we take questions on Twitter, again, at BobbyFantasyPro, at Mike Tagliere NFL, or via email at mailbag@fantasypros.com, or our new way where you can call in and leave a voicemail, and that's what our first 2 are here, Tags.
Yes, it is. And that's the thing. I've done a bad job of mentioning the phone number on the podcast because some people are like, Mike, I missed a show. And like, where did this voicemail thing come from? So I wanted to give you guys that number. If you guys did have a fantasy question, let us know. It's 209-881-PROS pros. Again, 209-881-PROS. And on there, we'll go through that. Make sure to leave your name, where you're from, and then your question. And obviously the one that applies to more leagues, those are the ones that we can answer because keeper league questions are really tough to answer because they don't apply to everyone out there. And we're trying to give advice to everybody we can out there.
All right, here's the first one.
Hello, my name is Adam from Gainesville, Florida. I have a question about picking your draft order. In my league, we have it where you can pick your draft order based off certain things we've done before. So I was wondering, in a full-point PPR, 12 teams, which draft spot would you like to pick from if you had the choice? Thank you, and have a great day.
All right, and the question is, which pick would you take if you could pick any pick in a 12-team full PPR league? Greg, we'll let you go first here.
I always want to draft closer to the top of the draft. First, second, third, just get me as close to the top. That allows you to be the most proactive with your picks. And it lets you get one of those elite running backs, one of those rare unicorns in fantasy football. And then in general, you're picking at the top of every other round, and you get to do it first. So there's just inherently more value to early picks than there are to later picks. Now, I will say that in 2 quarterback leagues, a late pick, like at the end, in that 10 to 12 range, can be just as good. But I have a feeling this guy's talking just about a 1 quarterback league. And in those, I just want to be up at the top. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. No, why do you like picking 10 to 12 in a 2 quarterback league? For those of us, those listening who are in super flex leagues.
Well, mostly because there are extra added, rare commodities, those really good quarterbacks, the Aaron Rodgers, the Russell Wilsons, Tom Brady's, those types of players. And while quarterback production is so replaceable in a 1 QB format, in a 2 QB league, those guys have a lot more value. They present a much larger gap over the lowest starting, like QB 24, the lowest quarterback starter. And I still don't really like to draft quarterbacks early, but if you end up at the end of the first round, and all the best running backs go, and some of the best wide receivers go, and you're there at 12, and you're looking at maybe drafting, AJ Green or Devonta Freeman as your top available guys at those 2 positions, then it might be worth it to audible and go with a quarterback in that spot, because at the very least, a guy like Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady will have a ton of trade value in season, and quarterbacks don't get hurt quite as often as running backs do. So it's a little bit more of a predictable, safe commodity, and picking at the end of the round, I think there's value in that. Again, not something I commonly do, but I like having the option there, and sometimes it works. Like some of those teams end up being the best 2 quarterback teams, where because everyone wants to wait at QB, you can end up getting 2 really good guys and leveraging that because you're already pretty far behind at running back and at wide receiver in those spots.
Tags, I'm going top 2 picks in a standard redraft PPR league, just 12 teams, no super flex, anything like that. And the reason why, you look at these sites where they're saying, you almost have to reverse the 3rd round because it's so unfair, and they show all the numbers behind that. You've got 3 of the top 25 picks, including the number 1 or 2, and those picks, their VBD on average is 140, 150. That's 2 first-round picks. That is so much better than picking 8 or 9, where your VBD is basically half of what Le'Veon Bell or Todd Gurley's going to give you. It's just downright unfair. That's why I say do an auction league.
Auctions are the best way to go for sure. I know, but the thing is auctions require some hardcore players, because auctions are the one type of league where if you don't have people that do their homework, you're gonna get a beaten, man. That's the thing. You're going to cause someone not to play fantasy football ever again because they're like, this is stupid. I suck. You have to be prepared for an auction. That's the thing, is that's for the diehards. So I understand why a lot of people don't go to auction, because not many people want to prepare that much. But those listening to this podcast here on June 20th, when this comes out, I know you guys are diehards. I know you guys would love to do an auction, and if you can convince your league mates to do that, do it. Take their money. But when it comes to a snake draft, absolutely. It does vary by year. But I always want near the top. I want a number 2 pick this year because I'll be guaranteed Le'Veon Bell or Todd Gurley. And then I've been doing a lot of best ball drafts, so I'm able to see kind of who I can get at that turn this year. And this turn feels just really unfair. Almost every time I'm able to land Devontae Adams there, and I have him as my number 4 wide receiver this year. So
that is so crazy that you can get him there.
I've also gotten Mike Evans, AJ Green on the turn before. That's stupid. You shouldn't get those type of players at the 2-3 turn. In worst case scenario, you could land someone like Christian McCaffrey, Joe Mixon. That's your worst case scenario. So I'm definitely the number 1 or number 2 spot, whichever one I can get. I'll take 2 just because that means, when it comes back in the 2nd round, I can get whatever player I want before 2 players go to the number 1 team. So definitely number 2 pick for me this year.
This time last year, we were telling people you can get Todd Gurley and DeAndre Hopkins at the 2-3 turn. That's exactly what I did in my big league. I got Le'Veon Bell and then those 2. And as you can imagine, it ended up very well. So, that's just one sample size. But picking in the first 2 picks, that is definitely where it's at. Now, where's the worst place to pick, Tags?
The 12th. The last pick, and I say that because there is some sort of disadvantage to being number 2. And I've mentioned on the show before is that I don't like being on the turns just because I don't like having to reach at a position. You don't know when the positional runs are going to start taking place. You don't want to reach for players. I'm not one to reach for a quarterback by any means, but if you're in a league where it's all of a sudden, you're in your home league and you see, you have your eyes on 5 different quarterbacks, 7 people need quarterbacks. And you're like, I'll get one. One will make it back to me. And then all of a sudden you see them start running that's the concern, is that like tight ends, they can dry up really fast. So I prefer, in the middle of the draft is ideal, I guess. But I as I mentioned this year, there's a reason I want number 2, but pick number 12 is the worst. You have 2 picks and then you're just waiting all over again.
I couldn't disagree more with this take, Mike. I hate being in the middle of drafts, man. You have to be so much more reactive to what everybody else is doing. Like, instead of being able to make 2 picks that like are planned together at one of the turns, either the early picks or the late picks, in the middle, you kind of have to follow suit with some of those runs sometimes. And even though you might be getting a safer value and you may not be missing out quite as much, you're still, you end up in a position where you're more susceptible to what other people are doing. You have to react to people on both sides. Whereas, I don't know, I really like being able to get 2 picks close together, because I feel like I can leverage that. And I don't mind reaching for players either, because I feel like I am a diehard fantasy player. Like, I do my homework. I know which players I like, and I'm willing to overspend if I think it's correct to do so. And I think that if you have fear of doing that, then you ultimately have fear of your own, evaluations on these players. I mean, I'm not trying to call you out or anything, but just a fundamental difference of opinion here. I'd much rather draft at one of the turns than in the middle of the draft.
Well, it's not even that though. So here, I'm looking at my overall rankings right now, and let's pretend that I have the number 12 pick. My number 12 and 13 players are Melvin Gordon, and then Dalvin Cook is 13. So if I have those 2 there, I have to take them if I want to reach, like, let's say I want Joe Mixon on my team this year, there is not a chance in hell he's going to last to the 3-4 turn. Do I believe that he's worth a second round pick? No, I think that I would be drafting him at his ceiling there, and there's literally no equity in the pick. But by waiting to the 3-4, that's like, oh my God, but I know he's not going to last there, but I want him on my team. I feel like by being at the turn, you are forced to reach on players like that. Like Devontae Adams, the reason that I love him so much this year is because you can get him at the end of the 2nd round, sometimes beginning of the 3rd round. But if you're picking in that 11 or 12 spot, you're screwed. Like, you are literally, when you're taking those picks right there, you
still might want to take him. It's close.
And that's the thing. I wouldn't necessarily fault someone for taking him, but I feel like you just lose all the equity that you found in that pick. And that's why I like being in the middle.
I agree with Tags on that. I agree with Greg that I like to pick at the turn. And I know that's kind of weird. Like, most people we have on like to pick in the middle, but I do like picking at the turn because of what he said. You can plan your 2 picks together and your whole roster is built around that, and then you have the whole time in between to build your queue and to think about what you're going to do rather than, just kind of reacting. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. No, I understand both sides to it. I just wanted to say why I didn't like drafting on the turn.
And this year, I'm looking at it. I think the top 10 is very clear. You could make a case for any order for those guys. Obviously not like Gurley at number 10 or anything, but those top 10 down, David Johnson, Michael Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins, those are my 8, 9, 10. After that, I think there's a huge drop off from Hopkins to Kamara to Mike Evans, AJ Green. I mean, you could be looking at like Mike Evans, AJ Green, Rob Gronkowski as your first 3 picks instead of Todd Gurley, Zach Ertz, Devontae Freeman. Like, those 3 are so much better. It's not even close.
We all agree that the beginning of the round is where you want to be drafting.
Yeah.
It's just, in terms of like fundamentally where I want to be, I'd much rather be closer to the turn than in the middle. But in general, you're right about there being inherently more value to an earlier pick. Like, 5th pick is probably still better than 12th pick in a vacuum. But I believe I'm a better enough fantasy player than most people that I can have a later pick and leverage that to my advantage because I can plan those 2 picks together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Maybe that makes me sound cocky, so.
Okay, here's the next question, guys.
What is up, Bobby and Tags? Love the show. Just wanted to get your guys' take on the Colts backfield. There's a lot of Wilkins and Hines hype and a lot of Marlon Mack being the workhorse hype. I'm leaning towards that Wilkins and Hines. Mack didn't seem to do a whole lot last year, but just wanted to hear your takes. All right, thanks, guys.
All right, guys, Colts backfield, and I'm having a hard time figuring out what to do here. I actually really like Marlon Mack above his ADP. I like Jordan Wilkins above his ADP. I don't really like Hines. I think he's just a 3rd down back and a decent one at that. There's like 8 3rd down backs I'd rather have than him, maybe more. So I'm avoiding him, but the other 2, I'll draft them both. What do you think here, Greg?
It's probably just a stay away situation for me, but I think considering the Colts' lack of proven receivers. We've talked about this a little bit already. I think it's entirely possible that we're going to get maybe like a Chris Thompson level PPR season from one of the pass catching Colts running backs, either Mack or Hines. I mean, Mack didn't do much in aggregate last year, but he was pretty efficient with the touches he had. 5.1 yards per touch in his rookie season, 17th best among running backs. Per player profiler, he was good at generating his own yards too. Number 2 in breakaway runs, number 14 in juke rate, number 11 in yards created per carry. The problem with Mack is that per touch efficiency probably won't translate to like predictable fantasy value week to week because he's going to be in a timeshare with these other two guys. I generally, if anything, want the cheaper ones here, and that's going to be Hines and Wilkins. I mean, Hines was a good pass catcher in college, 89 receptions in his 3 seasons there, and he's cheetah fast, man. He had a sub 4.4 40 time. If he can get involved as like an out of the backfield receiver and break some big plays, like he could have a Tariq Cohen type of season. I just don't know how predictable this stuff's going to be. And oh, by the way, Robert Turbin is still hanging around too. So I ultimately think it's a stay away, but there will be weeks where these guys are good.
You know, I'm not so convinced that Mack is only a third down back. I mean, he's as big as Devonta Freeman.
No, I think that he definitely is the odds-on favorite to be the leader of that backfield. It's just he's still going to be splitting time with 2 or maybe 3 other guys.
Yeah, it seems like a mess, Bobby. Coming from that Doug Peterson offense, like, Frank Reich coming over there, the way they drafted, the way that they're approaching everything, the fact that Marlon Mack had off-season shoulder surgery and has been missing valuable reps is a big deal. Jordan Wilkins was getting some first-team reps, but they're kind of...
Guess who else is, by the way?
Robert Turbin.
Christine Michael, baby.
Oh, Chris, stop. Just stop. He's
getting first-team reps. What do you want me to say? Not bring it up?
He's dead. He's not making the team. But in reality, though, this is like a real stat, guys. There was only 4 instances over the last 2 years where a running back has seen more than 43 snaps in Doug Peterson's offense. Every single one of those 4 times was Darren Sproles. Does Marlon Mack strike you as a Darren Sproles? No, Hines is actually the ones that would most resemble Darren Sproles in that offense. I mean, he had Ryan Matthews, he had LeGarrette Blount, he has Corey Clement, Jay Ajayi, Smallwood, Sproles. So it was a massive variety of different running backs in that offense that they've had, and I think that that's exactly what they're going for here. I think that LeGarrette Blount might be Robert Turbin. They might be like Corey Clement, could be Marlon Mack. I mean, it's an ugly thing. Darren Sproles couldn't be. That's what I'm saying. Darren Sproles, that role might go to Hines. It's so messy. It's probably one to avoid. I see Hines as like a Giovanni Bernard type producer. I don't even know if he's got that much upside, but I think that he's going to be someone where it's like if you're in a deep league, let's say you're in a 12-team league where you start 3 running backs and 2 flex, I think he can be a flex play for you or a running back 3 in a PPR format. But the rest of them, it seems like it's going to be ugly, and I'm slowly backing away from Mack. I do think that there's potential there, because if they don't run the Doug Peterson timeshare, Marlon Mack, I think, is the most talented running back there.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a scenario where he breaks out and he's a top 15 running back.
For sure.
You know, that's why I'm getting him. He's fairly cheap. When can you get him? 7th, 8th round?
Yeah, he's pretty cheap right now. I think he's outside the top 30 running backs being drafted, I want to say.
Yeah, I've got him in my top 30, and same with Wilkins. Like, I could see an Alfred Morris rookie season type of year from him where, for whatever reason, he's just the 1-2 back, and he ends up being so good that they just give him more and more work. He looks good on tape. I like Jordan Wilkins.
I do as well.
All right, we received something from a new listener, and I appreciate them sending it in about how much we love the Bears and hate on the Chiefs. And, it's really funny because, first of all, I'm from St. Louis. I hate all things Chicago. I try not to let any bias leak into that. I hate Chicago. It sucks. I mentioned it earlier on the show. Sorry, Tags. You're pretty cool. You're from Chicago. They got good pizza. That's it. All right. This time last year, we loved the Chiefs. Do you remember that, Tags? We loved them so much that we got blasted for that too. It's just, that's how things go. I love what Chicago did this offseason.
Yeah, Alex Smith was hated. He was one of the best 2 quarterback targets that you could have had last year. Tyreek Hill. I was higher on Tyreek Hill, I think, last year than I was this year, just because of the options they had there after they cut Jeremy Maclin. Kareem Hunt, we were high on him. I told you to spend a late 2nd round pick on him. And the Bears I've always been down on. It's so funny because I literally got in a conversation with one of our bosses at Fantasy Pros today. We were DMing back and forth, and I said, I feel like I'm unnecessarily taking crap from everybody for defending the Bears this year when it's something that I've never done. It's just they actually have some fantasy relevance now that like I can defend the Bears players because I think there's a lot of good moves that have taken place there. So, I actually was on the CBS podcast yesterday, and they asked me who I would rather take, Mahomes or Trubisky, in terms of a dynasty format. And we had a long conversation. I think there's a lot of parallels in their careers, and I think it ultimately comes down to which quarterback
Trubisky
do you think is
for me.
It's who you think is more talented. I understand that I think there's a slightly more upside with Mahomes because of the arm strength, but I think Trubisky's a little bit safer. He's got more mobility and things like that.
Yeah.
But the parallels in their careers with the coaching, the wide receivers, everything that aligns, the offensive line is probably better in Chicago, but there's so many things. And I actually got in a conversation with John Paulson from 4 for 4 about the ADP on these guys. And I said, I'd rather have Trubisky just because you're able to get him rounds later. And I think the production is probably going to be somewhat similar.
Yeah, for Dynasty, I like Trubisky better straight up, and I know that a lot of people think that's crazy. I'm not that high on Mahomes, and I like the Chiefs. I loved Alex Smith. I think he was an MVP candidate last year. I don't know why he didn't get votes because he was amazing, but if you look at Chicago, it's very similar to what the Rams did last offseason, and you would have called us Rams lovers if we would have said it last offseason. It's just one of those things. Teams change. I think the Bears are going to be a good offense this year. All right, next question. Christy in Florida wants to know if we're concerned about the Cardinals' offense and David Johnson, not only his holdout, but his production on a bad team. And if you draft him, who's the handcuff? Greg, we'll let you take this one first.
Well, his handcuff is Chase Edmonds. Let's just get that out of the way right now. All the other rushers in that backfield are either retreads or fullbacks. So Edmonds is the guy, and he's a talented player. So keep an eye on him. I'm not really big on handcuffing two running backs from the same team, but if you're taking a late flyer on a running back, Edmonds is the guy from Arizona to target. As for David Johnson, I'm not really worried. Holdouts rarely result in a lot of missed time. Even if he misses some games, like the early weeks of the season are usually the easiest time to find replacement players. And the Cardinals being bad, I guess, is a small concern, but not one I'm reading too much into at this point. Like, I think everyone is forecasting Sam Bradford to be replaced by halftime of week 1. And yes, he has a pretty spotty injury history, but he's a serviceable NFL starter. Like, he had a great week 1 last year. And so if he can stay healthy, I think that, he's going to make this team better than people realize. And injuries are in general really difficult to predict. So I think everybody piling on Sam Bradford as this, walking infirmary, it's a little bit too much for me. I don't really see how David Johnson's situation is any worse than someone like Ezekiel Elliott. Like, look at the weapons around him in Dallas. We talked about Allen Hurns earlier. Like, shouldn't we be just as concerned about Zeke as we are about David Johnson if that's the case? It ultimately comes down to this. Johnson is Arizona's most talented weapon, and they're going to use him a ton. Listeners shouldn't overthink this. He's a top 5 pick for sure. Like, don't worry about it.
His legs are fresh too.
Oh, definitely.
The argument for Zeke would be the offensive line, obviously,
Sure.
because the Cardinals' offensive line is terrible. My concern is Steve Wilkes too, first-year head coach. I think that, can we be realistic and say that I think that Arizona, I think it's safe to say they're probably going to be a bottom 10 scoring offense. Is that fair?
I think that's
a good projection,
yeah.
But I don't think it's safe.
Well, no. The reason I'm saying that is because, Bobby, I've talked about the study I do here. So over the last 6 years, it's now a 36 player sample size where the top 6 running backs over the last 6 years. So there's been 36 running backs that have finished in the top 6. 3 of the 36 have come from teams who are in the bottom 10 scoring offenses. So that's a real problem for me. 75% of running backs come from top 12 scoring offenses. We know the Cardinals aren't going to get there. So it's like, I'm worried about David Johnson. It's not the talent. I'm really not worried about that at all. And even with Ezekiel Elliott, the concern is there because I think the Cowboys are going to be a lot worse off without Jason Witten and Des Bryant. I don't care if Des Bryant wasn't getting as much separation as he used to. I don't care that Jason Witten was 90 years old. They were impact players in the field, and the Cowboys haven't replaced them, meaning that Zeke's going to have a harder time. I don't know if the Cardinals have replaced even any talent like John Brown. They don't even have that guy. Christian Kirk is a slot receiver. They're apparently going to try and play him on the outside. Bryce Butler, signing him, I don't know what that does for anybody. I just worry about this team in general. I'm not saying I have David Johnson as the number 5 overall player, to be completely honest, but I do have my concerns about him.
I've got him as my number 5 overall player too, and I don't really have the concerns. Like, so what if they're not very good this year? Like, they didn't make the playoffs in 2016, and he still had 2,000 yards from scrimmage. I don't care about the 20 touchdowns. Obviously, that's not going to happen. If it was, he'd be the 1-1, not even close. No one would even think about it. 2,100 yards from scrimmage. I mean, you get 2 players in one. You get one who rushes for 1,200 yards, one who receives for almost 900 yards, 80 receptions the last year he was healthy. They're going to run him into the ground again. He's going to get you 350, 370, maybe 400 touches. You take that guy in the top 5, I'm not worried about it.
Hey, Bobby, do you want to know what the Cardinals ranked in team scoring in 2016? They ranked 6th.
What?
They were 6th in team scoring. They averaged 26.1 points per game.
I thought you were talking about last year. I was like, I think you got that wrong, man.
No, last year they were so bad. No. I'm talking about with Carson Palmer and David Johnson.
Yeah, but they were that good because of David Johnson.
Well, and because of their defense at the time, too. Like, they were getting a lot of turnovers in
really
2016. Good. And I bet some of that scoring had to do with defensive scoring as well.
Correct. It's team points, yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, yeah, he takes a 20% drop back. 20% drop would be huge, right? That still puts him at 260 fantasy points, guys.
I'm with you. Like, I think that he's kind of a no-brainer. Like, we can find ways to nitpick him, but ultimately we all have him in our top 5. Like, I guess my question for you guys is, who are you taking him, or who are you taking over him at 3? Elliott and somebody else? Elliott and like Antonio Brown? Or are you taking another running back there in 3 at 4?
I've got Elliott number 2. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. I've got him at number 2, Bell at 3, Brown at 4.
I have Saquon Barkley at 4. And at 5, I would actually go back and forth on this one between David Johnson and Antonio Brown. I'd probably lean Antonio Brown, so I might have David Johnson 6 overall. He's at 5 overall right now, but I would take Saquon Barkley over him. So I just want to be honest about that. And that's because I believe the Giants offense is going to be a lot better than people realize.
By the way, if you take that 25% regression off David Johnson, which is huge regression, he would have been better than Le'Veon Bell last season. I mean, we're talking about someone who's, I think his floor is ridiculously high.
He's safe, and that's why, obviously, like Greg said, we're arguing over a guy he's still going to be a top 5 pick. But the question is, who would you take first? I would take Barkley over David Johnson.
Yeah, and I'm taking Zeke. You don't have Zeke over Barkley?
I do. I have Zeke at number 3.
Oh, okay.
But there are some concerns there. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that there's no concerns with Zeke either. I won't say that.
We got a question here from Braden in Illinois. He says Zeke has more standard fantasy points per game than Le'Veon over the past 2 seasons. Is the industry overlooking him? And when I saw that, I went and I looked at Zeke a little bit more, and I was like, man, I am off here. Because, first of all, I mean, Le'Veon Bell has big-time injury history. Like, it's not like he's missed a ton of games, but he has had a lot of injuries, and Zeke's behind that offensive line. There's more concerns from me about Le'Veon Bell than there are about Zeke. And Zeke has just been better the last 2 seasons. So, yeah, I guess he's my number 2.
I mean, not for me. And I also wouldn't say that a player that's universally ranked in the top 5 is being overlooked in the case of Zeke. Could he outscore Le'Veon? Sure, but so could plenty of other players. For me, Bell is the better receiver, and I'm drafting him ahead of Elliott because the Steelers just project to be much more effective and efficient on offense than the Cowboys do. That's really what it comes down to me, is I want the guy who's going to have more scoring chances because we win fantasy via touchdowns. And while Elliott's still going to get plenty, Bell, with that touchdown upside and his receiving upside, I think those are reasons enough for me to still take him ahead of Zeke.
I understand that, but it's not like Zeke might finish ahead of Bell. He's done it 2 seasons in a row.
Is that standard scoring or PPR scoring?
Standard scoring points per game.
Okay, yes.
Wait, Zeke didn't outscore Le'Veon last year.
I'm sorry, the 2 seasons combined, he has outscored Bell in points per game.
Yeah, that doesn't really move the needle for me because so much has changed with the Cowboys. Like, we've talked about all the lack of receivers there, like how different that offense is probably going to look. And yeah, Elliott's still going to get a ton of volume, but teams are going to be geared up to stop him. And you can try to gear up your team to stop Le'Veon Bell, but then Ben Roethlisberger gets to throw to Juju Smith-Schuster and Antonio Brown and Vance McDonald and James Washington. Like, they're going to be a better offense, and that those guys are going to stay on the field more often than the Cowboys. They're not going to punt as much. Like, that's where you find the volume with Le'Veon that's going to push him ahead of Elliott for me.
Yeah. Greg, you and I are high-fiving on this one. This is a slam dunk for me. I wouldn't even, honestly, like, a lot of times I'll consider it, but I wouldn't consider Elliott over Bell.
Okay, what about the injury history of Le'Veon Bell? Does that not concern you guys?
I mean, I try not to factor that in.
Oh, you have to, man.
No.
I mean, I guess you shouldn't factor it in for Kevin White then.
Well, then hold on a second. So then if we're going to factor that in, is it more realistic to factor in the off the field troubles? I think that's more predictable. And Ezekiel Elliott, if he got in trouble again, he'd be suspended for more than 4 games. So, I mean, that's the thing, is I'm anticipating both of these guys playing 16 games. I think Le'Veon Bell is part of the much better offense. And as Greg said, you just can't. The reason Le'Veon Bell is so good is because you can't just focus on him like you can with Ezekiel Elliott. Like you cannot do it. Because Ben Roethlisberger and his receivers will eat you alive. The offensive line plays they have a solid offensive line in Pittsburgh, so that's not an issue for him. Zeke, I think the talent's there, man. I have no faith in the Cowboys offense. It baffles me what they've done this offseason. I mean, and then Bobby, let's answer the realistic question here. How is Ezekiel Elliott supposed to get enough touches when Tavon Austin's getting 24 touches?
Oh, that's a great question. In fact, Zeke should probably drop out of the first 5 rounds, right? This is so funny. Like, that's the one player who, besides Ebron, has probably received more hype than Lamar Jackson too, but Tavon Austin's probably number 3 on that list. Like, the Cowboys are just raving about how good he is. I remember the Rams doing the same thing, and he sucked.
Yeah, they had Christine Michael too on the Cowboys. Remember that? I should have sold him when I had a chance in Dynasty.
Yes. Well, Christine Michael was amazing. It just didn't work out.
Still is amazing, right, Bobby?
Exactly. I've got him on my Dynasty team. I still haven't cut him yet. I'm holding out hope.
Nice.
He's really close though. I almost cut him today for who was it? Some backup tight end or something like that. I almost I can't remember.
It could have been. It doesn't matter which tight end. It would have been correct.
Yeah. I almost cut him for Blake Jarwin. He's not the backup, but I'll talk about him on another show. I'm actually really excited about Blake Jarwin. So tags, don't go pick up Blake Jarwin.
Done.
All right. And nobody else in the league who's listening to this, if they are. All right. Brian from Tennessee. And then we've got two quarterback questions. If D'Onta Foreman has no timetable for his return, just how early should we be taking Lamar Miller? And I think this is a really good question because I had Foreman really high. I don't anymore. And because of that, I mean, I had Miller really low. I'm moving him up my board, but I don't know how early I should be taking him.
I've actually been drafting Miller a fair amount in my draft so far. If you look at the ADP consensus on Fantasy Pros, Miller's being drafted as the RB24 around the middle of the 5th round. That feels like a pretty decent value to me, kind of even perhaps regardless of Foreman's health. I think considering the state of running back and our collective thirst to get those workhorse guys at the position, I think you can justify Lamar Miller as maybe even a 4th rounder or a 3rd rounder if you really want to push it. We know he has solid receiving ability over the past 3 seasons. He has the 18th most receptions among running backs, 114 on 141 targets. That's only one fewer than Jerick McKinnon in that span. And unlike McKinnon in that span, you're getting a lot of rushing production from Miller there too. I think if Deshaun Watson makes the leap that everyone seems to be projecting him for, that's really good news for Miller. Like, running backs are usually great beneficiaries of running quarterbacks, but I don't necessarily subscribe to the Watson hype. So I'm a little more inclined to target Miller in that 4th, 5th round range than the 3rd round. And really, there's no reason to overpay for Miller when he's already going in the 5th round on average. Like, maybe this Foreman news will pump Miller up a little bit, but I think that where he's going now is fair. And if you want to stretch for him in the 4th, like maybe you took 2 wide receivers in the first 2 rounds, Miller's a nice kind of consolation prize a little bit later at running back if you're maybe taking more of a gamble approach to find those workhorse running backs.
Greg, I'm going to respond to that here in just a second. But first, I want to know, how low do you have Deshaun Watson for your quarterbacks? Because Tags and I are super low on him. I've got him at QB 8 right now.
Yeah, he's my QB 7, I think, and I can double check that real quick.
Man.
Yeah, no, I'm out on Watson. Like, the touchdown rate was ridiculous last year. It was a tiny sample size. We just can't read into that. Him and Wentz and Luck are in my 3rd tier of quarterbacks. I call it the danger zone on 2 QBs, where generally I don't want to be drafting any quarterbacks in that QB 6 to QB 8, QB 9 range. Because, and I'm talking mostly 2 quarterback here again, because usually those are the guys who people draft in reaction to the actually elite players going, Brady, Wilson, Rodgers, Newton, Breeze. So, like, you don't want to overreact to those guys and think, oh, well, I got to get the next best quarterback, because the drop off there is a lot more steep than people realize. And people are completely overpaying for Watson and Wentz this year. Like, I have him ranked 7. I think he can deliver top 10 numbers, but the price is way higher than that. So there's no way I'm owning him.
I'll gladly take my QB 7, but I'll take him like 8 rounds after most people's QB 7. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But, I'm looking at Lamar Miller, and with Foreman being out for who knows how long, I think that his profile is pretty much exactly the same as it was this time last year. And somebody else who's very similar, we got another mailbag question asking, is Mixon's profile really any different? I don't think that it is. I think he's just as risky. I think he's got just as much upside. And I think I would rather have Lamar Miller than Joe Mixon right now.
What?
I know you think this is crazy, Tex, because you love Mixon, but I mean, he's so risky. Gio Bernard just rushed for 150 yards in week 16.
I've been waiting for the bet. I've been waiting for the Bobby moment to come out, and there it was. Okay, so this is going to be the bet. Last year we had Amari Cooper versus Sammy Watkins. I'm taking Joe Mixon in this bet, and I will bet. Yes, we will. This is going to be the bet. I think the listeners should decide.
My guy might not be Miller. I might take someone instead of Miller, but right now I'm leaning Miller.
He's backtracking.
Walking it back.
He's backtracking.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm saying right now I would rather take Miller. We'll see what happens with Foreman. You can pick any of the guys that I have ahead of him. Sony Michel, Rashard Penny, Mark Ingram, even missing 4 weeks. You can take any of those guys, but I'm not so sure about Miller. I'm saying right now I have Miller.
Greg, you be the judge here. Did Bobby backtrack? Did he back out of this deal?
Well, I mean, he never agreed to the deal in the first place, so he was just talking about a slight preference. But yes, he did say that he preferred Miller. But I don't know. I'm with you, Mike. Like Mixon for me all day in this head-to-head.
He's so risky, guys. Okay, are they going to screw this up again? What is different this year than last year? Anything? Is there anything?
Jeremy Hill's gone.
There's a lot that's different, actually. Yeah, I mean, just year 2 for Joe Mixon. Hill is gone, like Mike said. Bernard is still around,
but
he
lost weight.
The offensive line has improved. They traded for Cordy Glenn, then drafted Billy Price and guard Rod Taylor. I mean, I think that there is reason for concern with Mixon, but that's why he's going in the 3rd round and not the first or second round. There are just only so many like really truly elite rushers with that ability to become bell cows. I think it's okay to project Mixon for that based upon his talent, but I mean, we can't simply ignore that the Bengals will probably still be a somewhat bad team and that Mixon is still competing for touches with Bernard and maybe with Mark Walton as well. But I'm still willing to remain optimistic with Mixon, especially because if you can get him where he's going to be your RB2 or your RB3, probably in a running back heavy start to a draft if you have one of those early picks. And I think that's why he's typically drafted at that turn between the 2nd and 3rd rounds, because you're getting him as your RB2 or your RB3. I think casting him as your RB1 with the pick in that range is definitely risky. Like, I don't want to be doing that, but it's just like the value is there. The opportunity is there. The Bengals should be better than they were last year. Like, I don't know what's not to like. I mean, there's a little bit, but there's plenty to like as well. I think that he's worth the risk if you're backing him up with better running backs ahead of him on your depth chart.
I'll tell you guys what's not to like.
Marvin Lewis.
Here's how many RB1 performances he had last season. 1 in 14 games. 1 in 14 games. He was top 20 just 3 times.
It's a new season, Bobby.
This guy sucked.
Oh, Bobby, this is a bad argument. Let's just back away from it. I actually like Lamar Miller more than most too. I actually have him as my 19th running back, and that was before the Deontay Foreman news, because all along it seems like Deontay Foreman, the actual timetable for him is to come back in like October, which means he's going to start the season on the PUP list, which means that Lamar Miller is going to be the starting running back again. He's boring, but he's fine. I wouldn't be shocked if they gave Alfred Blue more touches, honestly. And actually, if you look down the stretch, Alfred Blue started getting more touches in this offense. I think it has to do with the fact that Lamar Miller has been very ineffective as a workhorse back. I think he's better in a timeshare. So I think that the Texans would be smart to actually involve Alfred Blue with Lamar Miller. So yeah, Joe Mixon, a lot has changed, and Jeremy Hill being in the mix last year actually did have an effect on how we would have ranked him. Why I didn't like Mixon last year. I love Joe Mixon this year. I feel like he could be Kareem Hunt 2.0.
Okay, we'll see about that. This will be fun. You are locked into Mixon. I haven't picked my guy yet. I'll let you agree to it, of course, but we will get there here shortly, and we'll come up with another good bet. Let's move on to the final 2 questions, though. Both of these are from Will in Arkansas. Who's your favorite 2 quarterback combo? And Greg, we'll start with you.
So this doesn't totally apply to me because I'm a bit of a quarterback agnostic. Like, I don't really care which ones I get. I just want to feel like I'm getting them at a discount or getting them at a value. Now, with that said, I'm only really hunting value based upon how I tier the players. So, like, I think there are a few elite guys, those proven high-end producers. There are fringe elite guys who are usually overcosted, the Watsons, the Wentzes. And, I mean, then there's the middle class. And that middle class is deep. It's like 15 to 20 quarterbacks deep who can produce outlier top 10 seasons, or maybe even like top 5 seasons like we saw Alex Smith do last year. And then there's the bottom tier of guys who still could have that sort of value and could vault up, the end of season rankings, but they're riskier based upon like a potential lack of playing time. I mean, I have preferences with certain players, but I'm okay with drafting literally any quarterback. for me, when it comes to pairing, I'm looking at like trying to put together certain archetypes, and we can kind of take a lesson from like how we draft wide receivers and apply it to quarterbacks in this scenario. Like, we don't want all boom or bust guys like Deshaun Jackson and Ted Ginn and Will Fuller. We want some guys like that on our roster, but we also want to mix in the steady producers who are going to give us the week-to-week floor, like Jarvis Landry last season. Not to say that Jarvis Landry is going to do that again this year, but that type of player. And I think we can apply that same sort of thinking to quarterbacks in your 2 QB leagues. Like, if I pay up at the position to get, let's say I spend, my top 2 picks at the end of the first round on QBs, I take Tom Brady and Drew Brees. If I do that, I'm way more inclined to take a chance on like the upside of a Pat Mahomes or Mitchell Trubisky as my QB3. But if I take on a more volatile or risky quarterback to start my draft, like Deshaun Watson or Andrew Luck or even Ben Roethlisberger, if I'm using my early picks on those types of quarterbacks, I'd rather make my QB3, my QB2 more stable, predictable guys like Alex Smith or Andy Dalton to kind of set a floor for my team. I think that actually, if you're doing best ball leagues right now, that's a really good way to practice the application of this mentality. Looking for, some high ceiling guys, but also some high floor guys. And so I'm not super locked in on specific players, but I am trying to mix up the type of players that I get at the position, if that makes sense.
What are you doing here, Tags?
I actually, so I understand that approach. My approach in 2 quarterback leagues is typically playing it safe. Because we like in a super flex league, it's a little bit different because you have a little bit more options, but in 2 quarterback leagues, I'm looking for a pair that includes like 2 of Brady's, Rivers, Stafford, Matt Ryan, Alex Smith, Andy Dalton. Like, if I can get 2 of those quarterbacks, I'm happy, because those are quarterbacks, to me, they like never miss games. They're ultra consistent. And I know some people will argue with me about Andy Dalton, but he's never finished worse than a QB 18 in fantasy. Yes, he has some bad games here and there, but who doesn't? You're going to suffer that with every quarterback from time to time, but they also have no competition to like lose their job. So all these guys, and none of them are like, they don't cost very much. So it's not to say I wouldn't take Aaron Rodgers if he fell in a draft. It's just he often doesn't, and I would prefer to have an elite running back in that area. But I typically look for safe options in 2 quarterback leagues. I'll take my chances in 1 quarterback because I can replace them. But in 2 quarterback, all the quarterbacks are gone. And if you have a quarterback that misses time with an injury, if one gets benched, like, these are all things you have to worry about. Just give me the safe quarterbacks in 2 quarterback leagues.
I like a safe approach as well. Different from Tags, though. Like, in standard redraft leagues, I want Aaron Rodgers if I can get him in the 3rd round, because his VBD is always first round when he's healthy. If he's healthy, you make the playoffs. If he's not healthy, well, you're screwed. But you just wasted a 3rd round pick. It's not like you wasted a 1st round pick on a running back or whatever. I love Aaron Rodgers in standard redraft leagues. I understand waiting. I'm waiting on anyone except for Rodgers. He's that much better than everyone else. Now, in 2 quarterback leagues, I want to play it safe in the sense where I have 3 guys that I can rely on. Not everyone's going to have 3 guys. And if one of my quarterbacks gets hurt, I don't want to be the guy out there marching out Trevor Siemian, who's now starting for the Vikings, or CJ Beathard if Jimmy G goes down or something like that. I don't want to play that game. I want 3 safe guys, and the 3 that I'm targeting, I would love to get all 3 of them. Jameis Winston, Matt Ryan, Dak Prescott, and I know that's quite a bit of draft value, but you know what? In 2 quarterback leagues, having those quarterbacks is a really big deal, and those guys are all going outside the top 10, so I think that they will all provide me top 10 value. I'm a big believer in all 3 of them this year. I mean, Dak Prescott last year, he sucked, right? No, he was a top 10 fantasy quarterback.
Yeah, for me, like, I should, I guess, clarify a little bit of what I said. I'm with you guys in general. Like, I want to be waiting, but I also want to get proven, consistent guys. So when I'm drafting right now, the guys I'm ending up with the most are Matt Ryan, Matthew Stafford, Ben Roethlisberger, and occasionally when Drew Brees slips into like the 4th round, I'll draft him there. And with my QB2, I'm also looking at Rivers, Winston, Marcus Mariota. Like, that's where I want to be in general. So I'm with you guys. I tend to wait at the position. I'm almost never paying up for Aaron Rodgers because the opportunity cost of taking him in the 1st round is just a little too high. Like, you could be getting an elite running back or an elite wide receiver in that spot. And I think that those are just more valuable than an elite quarterback, as good as Rodgers is. Like, I understand the appeal of him there, and you can definitely win by drafting him in the 1st round, but it's not the way I like to construct my team. It's not like one of my default settings when I go into a draft.
All right, final question here. This one's also from Will. Greg, who's your favorite sleeper for 2 quarterback leagues?
So I think we can all agree that sleeper is kind of a flawed and relative term, right? Like ultimately drafters are what they really want to know is which players are being undervalued and which ones are being undervalued late. So, I mean, we could talk about Drew Brees being a sleeper as a high end quarterback, like because he has that top 2, top 3 upside and he's being drafted as the QB 8 or 9. I think Luck same way. And in the middle tiers, like you could look at Winston and Mariota as guys with that sort of upside that's way higher than where they're being drafted. But if we want to go like really deep, I've got a couple guys to throw at you. The first is Ryan Tannehill, and I don't love Ryan Tannehill, but he rushes a little bit more than people realize, which is always a big boost to a fantasy quarterback. And he has a pretty clear-cut path to a job. Like it's not like I'm not worried about Tannehill getting benched for the backups on that roster, like I would be with some other quarterbacks like Joe Flacco. The other sleeper I want to throw out, and I mentioned this guy earlier, is Sam Bradford. Not a guy who I'm actively targeting at all, but based upon where he's going, he's essentially free, even in 2 quarterback leagues, just because everybody's, checking their watch, waiting for the Josh Rosen number to be called. Like Bradford last year had a lot of hype coming into that, Vikings situation as a player who could outproduce his ADP. And based upon game 1, he was well on track to do that. We saw what Case Keenum did in his stead. Like, I think that Bradford, he's definitely not in as good of a situation now that he's in Arizona, but they still have Larry Fitzgerald. They still have David Johnson. We talked about Christian Kirk earlier. Chad Williams is actually an interesting guy to me. I like Ricky Seals-Jones too. Like these are weapons that Bradford could succeed with. It's all about injury risk with him, and that's what makes him a sleeper. The fact that everyone has this stigma around him of him being injury prone means that Sam Bradford is going to be way cheaper than he probably should be, considering he's likely to be the starter for as long as he's healthy there in Arizona.
Tags, do you have a name for us?
Honestly, we talk about a lot of our quarterbacks that we like later in drafts all the time, and the fact that Trubisky's being drafted outside the top 24, he'd be the guy that I'd talk about, saying he's way, way undervalued. Like I have him, I think is my 17th quarterback right now. So him and Winston, like those are the 2 guys for me at the quarterback position who are extremely undervalued compared to their ceilings. Like I think they're being drafted at their absolute floors. So yeah, whenever you can get a quarterback like that in a 2 quarterback league, all that equity built in, that's who I go after.
Hey, by the way, you know how I've used that stat that Blake Bortles was the number 1 QB for the final 5 weeks? That's actually not true. He was the number 2 QB for the final 5 weeks. He was number 1 for 4 weeks in that period, but not the final week because he was really bad against the 49ers or something like that. Jameis Winston was actually number 1. He finished the season with the best 5 weeks of any quarterback. Meanwhile, Tom Brady QB 18 in that time. That's scary.
You want a good Jameis Winston stat? I got one for you.
We can do an entire episode on Jameis Winston stats. I would love that.
All right, well, I'll give you one while you're pulling that up. So the one that I have on Jameis Winston is if you take his 11 full games that he played last year and you extrapolate them over 16 games, that he turns into the number 2 fantasy quarterback last year.
Yeah, so mine is similar. It's essentially like if you take out all of the games where Winston was impacted by injury, where Fitzpatrick played or Fitzpatrick started, even if you throw out week 17 where Winston went bananas, I think he finished with 19.1 fantasy points per game last season in those games where he played the full boat, and that would have made him the QB 6 overall in points per game. So there's a ton of upside with Winston, and he's being drafted, I think, outside the top 20 at quarterbacks right now. It's pretty crazy. Like, I don't understand it at all.
I've got him QB 7. That is so crazy to me. I wish you were against Jameis Winston, so that's the guy I could bet on.
Yeah, you're not going to get that bet out of me, man.
How about this? Jameis Winston face Joe Mixon, fantasy points per game.
Give me Jameis.
Yeah, all right, guys. That's all for today's show. Greg, as always, it was a pleasure. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, thanks, man. If you listeners are interested in 2 quarterback leagues, come check out 2QBs.com. You got to spell it out. It's all letters. TWOQBS. We're constantly talking about the format, podcasts, articles. We'll have a draft guide later specific to the 2 quarterback format. Come check us out. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks.
And thanks again to the sponsors of today's show, KernelEncorePopcorn.com/fantasypros for 10% off, plus a chance to win a $100 gift certificate. And PristineAuction.com. Make sure to let them know Fantasy Pros sent you, and make sure to get signed up so you can get an entry in for that DeAndre Hopkins jersey sweepstakes. Just go to fantasypros.com/contest. For Mike Tagliere, I'm Bobby Sylvester. Thanks for listening and enjoy your football.
I just wanted you to watch me dissolve.